US sanctions against Iran, which have just come into force, have seen oil prices spike, with analysts predicting that that trend will continue. And with the US preparing yet more sanctions, the EU, Iran's second largest trading partner, has shown that it's ready to protect European companies doing business with Tehran.
We are determined to protect European economic operators engaged in legitimate business with Iran. This is why the European Union's updated blocking statute enters into force on the 7th of August to protect EU companies doing legitimate business with Iran from the impact of US extraterritorial sanctions.
We believe that it is, and it has to be, up to the Europeans in this case to decide with whom to trade.
The first round of sanctions prohibits Iran from using the US dollar and restricts trading in precious metals. It also includes limiting Iranian currency flows as well as constraints on the car trade. OK, let's discuss this story and several others now. My guest is former US Congressman Ron Paul. Good to have you on, Ron. Let's start with this issue then of sanctions. The EU is insisting that it will back EU firms that are dealing with Iran. Is this going to cause a widening rift between the US and the EU?
Well, I would think so. There's a big question there. I can't imagine it not already having done that. But so far, you know, there's been a lot of bluster. And I think one problem is that the United States is still pretty powerful. They have the currency for the reserve currency of the world, powerful currency, powerful military, a lot of wealth. And we can throw our weight around. So even if the Europeans feel put upon and attacked by these sanctions that we put on Iran, I think they need to get some backbone, but my big beef about all this is I just don't like sanctions because it leads to problems like this, and that's really where the problem is. And right now, I don't know whether the Europeans will stick to their guns, because what if they get threatened? Some of these big companies may be threatened and they lose some business with the United States. But eventually there will be competition, and that day will come. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but that day will come where the United States will have the competition. And right now, that's why there's talk about others having, other currencies to deal with as a reserve currency. China, Russia, and different countries would like to do that. So we have to wait and see what happens. But I don't like dictatorial powers. I don't like sanctions. I think that leads to currency wars. They've already started. And unfortunately, those kind of conditions sometimes can lead to a lot more and into some very hot wars as well.
You said that sanctions can lead to a lot more. Where are they going to lead? What do you think this will take us into?
Well, I think first we'll see shortly whether the Europeans stick to their guns. If they back down, then they're going to be around for a while. But if they stick to their guns, I think the United States would have to adjust their policies a bit, because how are they going to enforce that? If China and Russia and other countries and India, they do business with Iran, well, how are we going to punish them? We've already been doing a lot of that. What are we going to do? Put more sanctions on Russia? We continue to do that, but eventually that runs out of steam. But the one thing that I hope we can call attention to is the fact that this doesn't always end well, ends badly. And long term, sometimes it lasts a long time. I think of how long we've had sanctions and with Cuba, and it lasts a long time when you're powerful. But this is a lot bigger than having our sanctions on Cuba. This is a big deal, and I think in time people are going to realize that we might have to adjust because there's the other countries are going to not tolerate what we have done.
Now, as I understand, there's still not been any proof presented publicly at least, of the Russian attacks on US democracy that were used to justify the new sanctions bill. How does that work? How is it being perceived back home?
Well, you know, the warmongers, the people who want sanctions and everything that Russia does is bad, they're really in charge with our media, and they have really basic control, you know, in the Congress. Now, the president basically has been more sympathetic, but imagine the pressure is getting to him so that he sort of comes across as on again, off again. But I think it's tragic what's happening because they have no proof of anything, and for some reason these senators that have come up with this new bill, you know, Graham and McCain and Menendez, I mean, just out of the clear blue, they have no evidence whatsoever of their charges that they have made. And you know, I look at the world like none of us are perfect. All the countries have their shortcomings, but I think the responsibility for shortcomings should be their own country. So we come up short in many ways. I think that my job is to try to point that out so that we can change policy. But this idea of just blaming other countries and it's all somebody else's fault, and what we have to do is put on sanctions, and then when they retaliate, we think, oh, the world's coming to an end. They don't have a right to do that. We have to punish them. I think it's a very, very bad foreign policy. And of course, I, as a libertarian over the years in Congress, I advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. I just think we should be out of this business. And if you want to talk with people, fine, talk with people and work with people. So I liked it, you know, when Trump and Putin would talk, and I was sorry when the invitation for Putin was removed. I think talking is good. I was in the military in 1963, and I was glad that Kennedy talked to Khrushchev. We need to talk to each other, and that means by talking to each other, you ought to just get rid of all the sanctions and not pretend that we can run the world the way we have.
Well, you say talking is good. I think it might depend on what's said. Let's chat, if we may, about Twitter's new war on hate speech. As I understand, several libertarian figures have fallen victim of that. Where are we going with this, Ron?
Well, that's a good question, because that is a real mixed bag. The social media, in one sense, is a real delight. There's a lot of information out there. I've benefited by it. But it originated with a lot of government assistance, and the biggest role that social networks play is working with the government and giving the government the information. They do the work for the NSA. So it's a mixed bag. They call themselves private companies. The libertarian says, we don't regulate private companies, and yet it's so mixed. So I hope, the only thing I can hope for under these conditions is that maybe you know, the market will devise something that can become an alternative. But when you look at the strength and the power and the regulation of speech, and indirectly we're talking about the government, and the reason that I think happens is that you get accused of treasonous activity and treasonous speech, and because in an empire, treason is in an empire lies, the truth is treason. So when people blurt out the treason on the internet, it's not like they're saying something mean and ugly. It's the things challenging the status quo is what they can't stand, and it unnerves them. So they have to silence people. So it's more likely for an individual like myself to be silenced because I represent a challenge to the status quo. But if anybody understands our First Amendment, the First Amendment isn't there to talk about the weather. The First Amendment is there for us to be able to challenge our government. But if we do that now, whether it's direct regulation from the government or indirectly through social media, we have a real challenge. I'm just hoping that technology can stay ahead of it all, and that we can have alternatives to the dependency on Twitter and these other companies that have been working hand in glove with the government.
Well, some critics are saying that these new policies of Twitter expose it as being a project of the Democratic Party. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Yeah, well, you know, overall, I think the parties are a farce. You know, our policies don't change from Republicans to Democrats. They all love big spending. They like regulations. They like the NSA, the TSA. They like the Federal Reserve. They like printing money. They don't care about deficit. But when it comes to power, there's a big struggle. Who gets to pull the switches and pass out the money? Then they fight and fume. So there is this partisan fight that goes on. And obviously, you know, we've heard heard about this. It amazes me that the only thing that comes of it is that there's charges against Russia for taking control of our elections, and it's all about Trump, and yet it hasn't been looked at carefully enough that maybe the other side had an axe to grind too, and the Democrats were probably more involved than the Republicans. But I think all of that is just a mess that we don't need, and I think if the world were put together more on a libertarian viewpoint, there wouldn't be this need, and there wouldn't be this contest with each other. But it is pretty vicious, is the way I see it, and it goes now into our universities, on the streets, and people are getting angry and upset, and there just shouldn't be any reason for that. But it's the fact that if some of us, tell the truth about our government, they call us treasonous, and that we're speaking out of line, and they would like to punish us. And I think that's part of what's happening with the social media.
Ron, you'll always be welcome to speak freely here on RT. Many thanks for your time. A pleasure to speak to you once again. Ron Paul, my guest, former US Congressman.
Thank you.
On to other news now. One of the most popular online alternative news channels, InfoWars, has seen a major crackdown on it, with Facebook, YouTube, Apple and Spotify blocking its accounts and taking down its content. All of this on the same day. Here's how Facebook explained that move.
We have taken it down for glorifying violence and using dehumanizing language to describe people who are transgender, Muslims and immigrants, which violates our hate speech policies.
InfoWars, if you're not too familiar with it, was launched by Alex Jones in the late 1990s. His YouTube videos have been watched more than 1.6 billion times. Many have deemed him a peddler of conspiracy theories. In 2015, Donald Trump appeared on the channel and praised Jones's work. Meanwhile, people on social media have clashed over this ban.
I don't support Alex Jones or what InfoWars produces. He's not a conservative. However, banning him and his outlet is wrong. It's not just a slippery slope, it's a dangerous cliff.
Apple removing Alex Jones and InfoWars isn't some terrible form of censorship against conservatives. He said Sandy Hook wasn't real. He's suing parents from the school. He said the Holocaust wasn't real. He's not just a conservative. He's a conspiracy theorist who hurts people.
InfoWars says it has been banned by Facebook for unspecified hate speech. Regardless of the facts in this case, the ability of Facebook to censor rival publishers is a global antitrust problem.
Political commentator Gina Loudon believes the decision could prove damaging for the social media giants.
Whether or not you agree with Alex Jones, I would be just the same amount of adamant that I think it's bad policy to ban people no matter what. I mean, really no matter what. I mean, in the United States, we have a concept of free speech that we love very much. It means a lot to us. Now, these are private companies. They can do what they want to do. I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to do this, and I'm certainly not saying that government should regulate whether or not private companies can make decisions like this. But I am saying I think it's a bad decision, and I think that in the long run, it will not pay off for these companies. It is an extremely slippery slope. I do believe ultimately that probably some conservative entity will come up with competitive platforms for the ones that are doing the banning and the censoring, and ultimately they will have stiff competition that may even relegate them to relative obscurity because of things like this, especially if they remain so one-sided.